Hello, it's all of us. It's here to do a webinar. I'm just gonna sing to. No, I'm not. No one wants that.
No one wants that.
Nobody wants that whatsoever. All right. Well, hello once again, everyone. Welcome back to your Wednesday night webinar, where we talk about all things Wednesdays and webinar. No, it's not also what we talk about. We talk about OCD, and on this lovely week of the month, we also include some of our friends from the substance use world as well, because we know that a third of people utilize, unfortunately, substances as a way to try to manage their OCD and intrusive thoughts and images and urges and feelings and compulsions and things of that nature. And so we always take questions on those areas as well. Tonight, as always, joined by my frenemy.
Frenemy, yeah. Yes. I will co-sign that for you, yes.
My sister from another mother, Stacey Conroy. How are you tonight, Stacey? Good to see you.
I am well, thank you.
Okay. And we have another guest. Radhika, do you want to introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about who you are?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Patrick and Stacey, for inviting me for this webinar. Actually, this is not the first time. I think I've been here once before.
It was a couple of years ago, I think.
Yes, That's right. So by way of introduction, I'm here because I lost my son it's exactly 10 years now to OCD-SUD. So a few years ago, I felt like I needed to share his story and talk about this. And that's why I'm here and excited to be here and sharing all of that with you guys.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. We do appreciate it. And we kind of go through the scroll. We see what questions come up. We answer some of those. We have chats in between all of them. So we'll get started on a couple of questions and see where they're at. And then we'll get into a couple of other things and kind of go from there. Mark says, I have harm OCD and struggle to sleep every time I close my eyes. I'm not sleeping. I would get this intense feeling of losing control, everything moving fast, closing feeling not real, and dizzy fog. I would love to know your input, maybe if it was a panic attack. I mean, it could be. It's a possibility that is a chance of happening. I think the most important thing is, number one, if it is panic, you can do some great interoceptive exposure work. These are exposure and response prevention exercises designed to help people who have panic. And you do things like running in place, hyperventilating, breathing through straws, spinning in chairs. Learn that you can handle the uncomfortable sensations that panic may be bringing about. And number two, I love good sleep hygiene as well, which is if you're in bed for more than 10 minutes without falling asleep, get out of bed, right? Go sit in a chair, read a book. Don't turn on your screens. Don't watch the TVs. Stacey, you do a lot of sleep hygiene stuff with people. What else do you want to throw in on that? I think that's so important.
Have a routine when you're getting ready for bed. The same thing. We learn habits, It's kind of like when you wake up in the morning and your first thought is coffee. We learn habits. The other thing I will add is sleep hygiene works. It takes 30 days to form a habit. So if you think it's going to work like, trazodone or Benadryl or something, it's not. You've got to do it consistently. And I live by sleep hygiene routinely. I practice what I preach. And I go to bed at the same time. I get up at the same time, with some exceptions during Halloween Horror Nights. But
or if a football game is running long, there might be a reason.
Well, yeah, certain football games, here and there. But it's good to have a routine. Routines matter because our body and our brains learn what happens in routines.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. One of the things that Stacey, you and I always do and we talk about is our SIG. We have our OCD-SUD SIG. You want to tell everybody a little bit about that?
Yes, we have the special interest group for OCD-SUD. We have a website, OCD-SUD.com. I don't know why I have to think about that.
Every week. It's like, what is the website again? I don't know.
What is that website? Yes, but it's OCD-SUD.com. And we have different resources and book suggestions on both sides of the fence. So if, you're more OCD, provider or patient or loved one, and you want to know more about SUD, there's books. If you're more SUD provider, loved one, or provider, patient, caregiver, whatever, there's books there. So we got a little bit for everybody.
Yeah. BM asks about struggling with mental compulsions, harm related, and when doing an exposure, was telling themselves, see, I'm not a harmful person. I'm not snapping. And they weren't sure if that was a compulsion. It is. And so wanted to know, how do you do exposures without mentally reassuring yourself their mind won't stay quiet? So Stacey, how about on a lived experience side from you? I'm sure that there were times that it felt like you were constantly telling yourself you were okay. How did you work past that?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's hard. But again, the response prevention part of the process is you really do got to step outside of seeking that reassurance. And sometimes when it's internal reassurance, you feel like you're getting away with it because nobody else can see it, but you know what's happening. And you do need to step away from that. And it can be hard. I can't say that I was successful at it my first try, my second try, but you get there. And when you realize you're doing it, that's when you need to stop.
Mm-hmm.
Learning the pattern of OCD is how you fight.
Right. And stop doesn't mean stop reassuring yourself, because if we could just tell people to do that, that'd be great. Yeah. And then we wouldn't have jobs anymore.
You mean I can't just say stop it and collect money?
I've tried. I don't get a lot of repeat customers after a while. They go somewhere else. No. It might mean undoing it. Like if you find yourself saying to yourself, see, I'm not a harmful person. I'm not snapping, but I might tomorrow, or something like that. Adding that statement of doubt into the experience. Yeah, we always snap. Right? Yeah, it is possible. Right?
It is.
Yeah. And Radhika, you probably saw things, or maybe with your son, I don't know how much of it was going, but obviously there's ways to reassure yourself internally with dialogue, but there's also ways to escape situations, and that's where substance comes in. And that's where I think a conversation with the two of you is so interesting. That did you have ideas that your son was using substances for this reason, or how did that kind of come about?
So at the time that I think he was always very over smart, maybe too smart for his own good, So we didn't know that he had started using it, and I think it kind of crept up gradually on us. And it was only after I spoke to you more recently that it all clicked in my brain, because I realized I didn't. Ultimately, he died of overdose, but his OCD was diagnosed back when he was about 15 or 16, and his substance use came in probably 17, maybe 18, and became worse just in that 1 year, and then he died. The thing is that I think he used the substances as a way of coping with his OCD, and then it became a way of life for him. And I think he was I was saying this without realizing this, that he was doing the he was abusing substances in a very OCD way, and and I think suddenly it all clicked for me that he was probably in that. I know when I've talked to you guys, you've said there's about 25 to 30% of people where there's a co-occurrence between OCD and SUD, and I think he fell into that bucket. So it doesn't mean that everybody that the way I have absorbed this is that everybody who has OCD doesn't end up with SUD, but then there's about 30% of people for whom they use substances as a way of coping, and then that becomes a way of life. It's.
Yeah. Stacey, do you know anything about that? I don't know if that sounds familiar.
Little bit. I mean, like I said, I found those substances and my brain got quiet, and that was like, oh, I have found a friend. The problem is the friend became the enemy, just like OCD. In the beginning, it may not seem like a huge deal, but then it gets bigger and bigger, and taking up hours of your day. Same thing with substances. In the beginning, it was like, ooh, my brain's quiet. This is great. Let me do this again and again. But then it became the enemy, and it was taking up hours of my day. And between the two, I lost everything that was important to me. I didn't have time for anything else.
Yeah. And I think my son, for him too, because I was recently talking to a friend of his, and he said that Nandan did not like to do any substances, but he just did them because he felt that it was helping him. But then, ultimately it just took on a life of its own. And even though he didn't like doing it, he just felt that quietened, gave him that his mind was a little quiet during that period. It's just...
Well, and a lot of people find that. And right now, like one of the big things, and I chuckle sometimes when I hear this, people will write about it in a blog or an article, is when I'm using marijuana, my OCD thoughts go down. Well, yeah, when I used alcohol, my OCD thoughts. When I used heroin, my OCD thoughts went down. If you're using a psychoactive substance that, brings a blanket over you, changes how you function in the world, it's going to slow your OCD thoughts down. The problem is it's not a cure. It's just a cover-up. It's just like a compulsion. It will make you feel better for a little while.
Yes.
Yeah. And we're stuck in the little while.
Yeah, and so it's always a temporary solution. And that's the problem. That's why it's important to seek treatment for the OCD. And even if you believe it to be, recreational alcohol, marijuana use or something, step away from it to get the OCD treatment and then see where you're at,
Yeah, that's true.
The problem is the compulsions work for a little while and the drugs work for a little while.
And then after a while, you need more compulsions. And after a while, you need more drugs, right? Because you build up tolerances to both of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly what happened with Nandan, right? Instead of solving the first problem, which was the OCD, he ended up, second problem was created with the SUD. And then he had two problems and it became more runaway, right?
Yeah.
And we know that happened with Margaret's son, Riley, and what occurred with Riley too. This sadly is not an uncommon problem, right? That's the issue. And that's why we like to talk about it here. Is it just, if anybody here who's watching tonight has gone into the realm of substance as a way to try to manage the things that are going on, we want to give you the cautionary tale that just like there is never going to be enough compulsions to make OCD go away, you won't even be able to take enough substances to make OCD go away either.
That's right.
And that could be at the detriment of your health and of your life, unfortunately, in some situations.
Yep.
Yeah. And I always tell people on these webinars and at conferences and stuff, people meet me. You've met a person who's been in long-term sustained recovery, but I was homeless. I, was unemployable. I couldn't finish a college class. I, started college 3 times before I finally went back after having several years of SUD recovery and some therapy to boot for OCD and PTSD. So it will take everything from you slowly over time, and it takes a while to build that back up. And I think sometimes people think that the journey is easy because they've met me so far into my recovery, but it's hard. I went to therapy several times a week. I went to residential. I went to detox 7 times. It took a lot of work to get where I am today. It took ERP, took some acceptance and commitment therapy. And it takes being honest with the people in my life about what's going on. There's nobody in my world that doesn't know that I'm in recovery from SUD. Even my boss at work knows, because
I'm sorry. I forgot I wasn't supposed to tell him. I apologize.
Yeah. I know you ratted me out. Thanks, Patrick.
No problem.
But it's that level of, commitment that you put in over time that gets you to where you want to be. And it is a lot of work. And I never want to downplay the fact that it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
So, and I did see one question. Somebody asked, how do you know when an OCD thought is OCD? Well, if you think it's OCD, guess what? It's probably
It probably
OCD.
is.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. We got, there's some good questions tonight here. So let me jump in. Question: if someone is addicted to marijuana in high school, college, and quits cold turkey, can it cause OCD to onset? Was the question.
I don't know that it can cause OCD to onset. I think if you have a predisposition to OCD, stress and anxiety can bring that about. We find that, in a lot of situations, stress can make OCD worse. If your body is under stress, then you can experience symptoms. I can't say that it's a cause and effect, but stress does make OCD worse, and it may bring it out to a point where you now have noticed it. But everybody has a starting point with their OCD.
Yeah. Actually, if I can share, right, I think for my son too, I think that's what happened when he went into college. I think again, as long as he was 18, he was with us. We were on top of him for, visiting the psychiatrist, seeing the psychologist and all of that. We went off to college. I think the stress definitely made his OCD much worse. And then, of course, he was away from home. He could try all the substances in the world and try to, use that as a coping mechanism. He stopped taking his medication. I mean, he stopped going to the psycho. There were a multitude of factors, but certainly I think the OCD became much worse under stress. I think he with college. So I do agree with you, Stacey, about stress and OCD. At least I've seen in my son's case.
There are a couple of other ones. Can Lyme disease lead to OCD? There is some discussion in PANS about strep and Lyme and other things that can lead to pediatric autoimmune neuropsychological syndromes. One of the outcomes of that could be tics, could be also tics could cause tics in that situation, or could also be OCD potentially in that situation. There was a question too about anti-viptic. I don't know what that is. Do either of you? Does that sound familiar to anyone?
No.
Anti what?
OVIPTIC. I don't know what that is.
No.
Okay. For either of you, was there ever enough reassurance that your son could get, or Stacey that you could get, that scratched the itch of the OCD? Getting a lot of reassurance questions here, so I'm just kind of combining them into one to have that discussion in the family, and also, just what it might have led to then for people being frustrated over the fact that no one was providing them what they felt that they needed in the terms of the reassurance. And might that be one of the reasons substances comes into play? So I'll leave that to the two of you. I'll sit back and listen.
Stacey, do you mind going first on that?
Not at all. Patrick, I'll let you know when I'm done seeking reassurance. So no. And the funny thing is, I have so many people in my life who treat OCD. When I get stuck in that trap, they just beat on me mercilessly. It's very entertaining. But no, one of the things I've said before, particularly at conferences, is I utilize 12-step programs early on, and I found it very helpful. But my sponsor, who didn't know a thing about OCD, and I had not been diagnosed with OCD at that point, she just naturally would not give me reassurance. I would say, well, I have this, and what if I die? And she goes, well, someday you will. And she would just shut me down. used to drive. I wanted to bang my head against the wall.
Sure.
Fortunately for me, there are a lot of other people who are less healthy than her that provided a ton of reassurance.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, no, there's just like there's no answer that OCD will accept. Seeking reassurance, it never solves it. There's
That's true.
never enough reassurance out there. One is too many, and 1,000 is not enough. Is more than just a saying in a 12-step program.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, I don't know if I understood the question exactly, but I think that with my son, right, I don't think reassurances helped. I don't.
No, well, they wouldn't have. I was just curious how much he was asking of you for that. Yeah.
No, he wasn't. I think I would have loved to tell him, like, for example, he would keep having his bath over and over again. And I think it's, even if I tried telling him that he was perfectly clean, that didn't help him, right? So I don't
There you
think,
go. Okay.
it's,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah. So you definitely were not seeing that.
No.
And do you think when he started using substances that he felt less concerned about the bath, or?
That is very true. I think,
There
you
you
know
go.
what? It's very, very true, because I do feel like initially, like, he had, what do you call it? Cleanliness OCD. Like, he was always washing himself. But I think after he started substances, that curve came down, probably in a way that I shouldn't say that I probably preferred the older version of the other version of my son without the
Sure.
substances, but but yeah, I feel like it changed, the complexion changed. So maybe it calmed him down in a different way with the substances. But to Stacey's point, that was short-lived, right? It was it was not permanent. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's important probably for families to pay attention to also, that if you have noticed somebody who is doing certain behaviors and then suddenly maybe there's a change, but there wasn't an intervention for that change,
Yeah.
might be a sign, right? Might be a sign of some potential things for for some substances that might be abused in that situation.
Yeah, I agree.
We got people from Lebanon. We got people from Ireland here tonight. Wow, that's really
great.
Cool. Like seeing some of that. Yeah. Stacey, some people are putting on here certain drugs also make their thoughts worse and lead them to feel more anxious.
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk about certain classes of drugs or the way that certain drugs might? Because even in this situation, they say marijuana makes their thoughts worse, which people I think would typically think, oh, if I take marijuana, I'm just going to zone out. But that might not be the case for everybody, correct? So I was wondering if you could do a little education on that.
Yeah. No, everybody responds differently to medication. So why wouldn't everybody respond differently to different substances? I know people who take marijuana and it does have a calming effect on them. And I have people who take marijuana and it makes them an anxious, nervous, complete wreck. Not everybody responds to things in the same way. So there are studies that show that marijuana actually increases anxiety and rather than decreasing anxiety. And that's a high proportion of the population. And the interesting thing that I've seen as a clinician is I have people who utilize substances whose anxiety goes up, but their OCD thoughts go down. So they have more anxiety, but less intrusive thoughts. So it ends up as war for them as like, I like that I don't have as much intrusive thought, but my general anxiety about life goes up.
Yeah.
And so we have to sort of work on both and treat the OCD so don't feel the need to use the marijuana, and then the total anxiety comes down. So substances in and of themselves can lead to anxiety, even if they are quieting.
funny when Stacey says quieting, then she glitches and then she's quiet. So
I think you guys might have lost me.
yeah, there we go. Now you're back.
Okay. So again, you might be solving one problem, but you're creating another.
Other problem, yes, that's right.
Yeah.
For sure.
And that can happen with any substance. Cocaine can make people paranoid. And, some people cannot, some people, again, zone out on it. Other people are completely paranoid on it. They start thinking that bugs are crawling on them, or people are looking at them. Their neighbors are looking in their house. I've seen it all. So you can have psychotic symptoms from marijuana and cocaine or stimulants, speed. A big thing now is because of the studies on psilocybin, LSD and stuff. People take mushrooms trying to, cure themselves. That's not how it works. And you could go on a very bad trip and have a very bad experience. So don't try things on your own, or, because you just don't know what the outcome will be. If you're interested in something like that for your OCD, anxiety, look for a trial.
Yes.
Do it in a controlled setting with people who can help you deal with the negative impacts of it. I've worked with people who have done a legitimate trial, and they say even though they did find it beneficial, the experience itself was terrifying.
Yeah.
And, it was the outcome that was beneficial, but the experience was very scary, and they were glad that they had trained professionals around to help them. So a lot of substance use does not end up the way you think that it might.
Yeah. No, I echo 100%, because other than being the mother of Nandan, I've spent the last 30 years actually in clinical trials. That's my background, clinical trial project management. So I also, work closely with Dr. Rodriguez and others. And I know that with Nandan, of course, he treated himself as a guinea pig and was abusing large quantities of various drugs. But in the controlled way in which you do through a clinical trial, so Stacey, you're 100% right that if you want to do it that way through a proper trial, and that way everything is monitored, and you're not just using yourself as a guinea pig and just starting things on your own, that would be the right way to try something, if at all somebody is inclined. But it's makes 100% sense.
Yes. And somebody even put in the chat, cannabis-induced psychotic disorders in the DSM-5. It is. Substance-induced psychotic disorder, it can be various substances, is in the DSM-5. And then the other thing I want to add is somebody said it could be genetic. There's genetic links for OCD, and yes, there's genetic links for SUD. If somebody in your family has a substance use disorder, you are at higher risk. The problem is right now we can't go, oh, you are going to have the risk factor come out and you aren't. There are people who have 2 alcoholic parents who had, 4 kids. 2 of them have problems with alcohol and 2 of them do not. I have a genetic condition called albinism. My brother has brown hair and looks like he's Italian. So, yes, genetics can play a factor.
Right. We are at our halfway point, so that's awesome. Radhika, I'm going to ask you, do you have any headphones you could utilize? We're getting a little feedback off of your microphone. That's why I hit the mute for a second just to test it. So I was just wondering if you could grab some headphones and use those so we don't get that feedback.
Let me see. Okay, give me a moment. Then I'll have to put myself on.
That's fine. I can just mute you. That's no problem. So,
phone, will that work?
Either way, however you want to come in, but just to help with a little bit of the feedback that we're getting.
I see. Okay. Let me. Right. Okay.
Thank you. All right. So I have some OCD and I'm seeing traits in one of my loved ones. How can I tell them that I think they should seek treatment? I think they're abusing drugs to cope, and they have a family history of SUD. Well, boy, if that's not the perfect question, like a softball to Stacey Conroy right there. Stacey, take it.
Well, it's complicated.
I'm gonna put it up for everybody just to see as well.
Yeah. One of the things that's very important is to come at this as in compassionately with I statements and concern. You don't want to say to somebody, well, you have a problem. You can share your experience. You can share some resources. You can say, I'm concerned. You can say, I have OCD thoughts, and it's great when they go away. And, our mutual relative has struggled with, alcohol or substances. And I'm just concerned that, anybody who goes down this road, you just want to stay away from statements about you need help, you should do this, you should do that. It really needs to come from a place of caring. And I've struggled with this, and it's very common for people. You could even share the website that we have with the OCD-SUD that has resources for both. Let them do some exploring. The thing with doing an intervention for people is it may not be well received. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It doesn't mean that you don't want to share some resources, but realize that that individual might be caught off guard and might push back. And in order for you to be helpful, you can't have them cut you off. You don't want them to stop talking to you or being around you. So it really needs to come from a place of compassion and love. But I also say to people, particularly around, SUD, but it's true of OCD, if it's really severe, is sometimes you get to set limits and set boundaries for your own health. And so if someone is living in your house and has severe OCD to the point where your, water bill is $600 a month, which I have seen before,
Sure.
or somebody's, stealing from you to support their substance use habit, you do get to set boundaries and maybe not have that person in your house, but you can still give them a ride to their therapy appointment or buy them lunch. Don't give them money for lunch, especially if it's SUD, but you can buy them lunch. I tell parents, meet your child at McDonald's, buy them breakfast, let them know you're still there. I've had parents provide a winter jacket to somebody because they, unfortunately are spending their money on drugs. So there are things you can do to show that you care and to help somebody along the path, but you don't want to push to the point where they push you away, and you don't want to be pointing fingers. So what are your thoughts, Patrick?
Yeah. Wow. I think you summed it up very nicely. So thank you for that. And I think there's always great information to hand out to people. Like you can send someone a link to a webinar like this that you could just say, hey, I saw this and I think there might be some information on there that you might find helpful. You can send them, not to toot my book, but I wrote a book called the OCD Answer Book, which is just quick questions and answers about OCD that maybe that's helpful. Or if you think about like the OCD conference coming up in July, maybe you attend the conference and invite somebody with you to go to the conference with you and have them sit in some sessions and maybe attend some groups, and they might start to realize, wow, these people are a lot like me, more than I ever thought that they were. So I think that in addition to what you said, Stacey, there's ways to subtly introduce some things to people and just offer the opportunity. You don't have to make anybody do something, but you can always offer the opportunity to someone for education.
And sometimes sharing your story, because like I said, I share my story sometimes, not extensively, but I found key points in my career. I've shared it at work with a few, employees that, say, oh, could you tell me a little bit more about OCD? And I do, from a professional and a personal standpoint, only to find out that their child had OCD or they have OCD.
Yeah.
I had one interaction with a coworker who came to me and said, hey, my kid has OCD. Can you recommend a therapist? And yeah. She goes, and if somebody had intrusive thoughts, what would you recommend? And I recommended Imp of the Mind, which is a great book.
Great book.
Yep. And she took it from my office. I said, here, borrow this, read it. She called me 20 minutes later and she's like, I have these thoughts, and I have never told anybody that I have these thoughts. Now my kid has these thoughts and I want to help my kid, but I need help myself. And I didn't know that other people had these thoughts.
Yeah.
So even sharing your story about how you struggle can make a difference. It can allow people to come and ask questions and open up to you in a way that I didn't know she had OCD.
Yeah,
You know?
big time, right? Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Is my audio much better now?
Oh yeah, much better. Yeah, that's great.
Okay,
No
great.
more feedback. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's great. Yeah.
Someone asked, what's the name of the book? The Imp of the Mind is by Lee Bear. That's a great book if you want to do a quick read about OCD, or mine was the OCD answer book, if you want some Q&As about OCD also. Radhika, how did you all discover the OCD was going on?
I still remember the exact time when we diagnosed him. This was when I think he was probably in his 10th or 11th. I think, he was always washing his hands a lot, and we didn't really probably think too much about it at the time. But in his 11th grade, he he was washing his clothes, in the washing machine. And then he finished washing, and then I just went to talk to him. I was standing next to the washing machine, and he said, he pulled out the clothes and he was about to put it in the dryer, and he said that you've looked at the clothes, so I have to rewash it. So that's when I realized, okay, this doesn't something is not quite okay here. So I talked to my husband. We then took him to a therapist, and we took him to a psychiatrist first and got him. Then they said they confirmed the diagnosis, and then he was seeing a therapist. You know, in those days we would go. Had somebody we went to every week, and then he put him on ERP exercises, and so that's how it all started. And the SUD came later. So, and
Yeah, that's interesting. Just that you looked at his laundry and then it was contaminated.
yeah, that's right. And I was just looking at the comment about the 600, or what Stacey said about the $600. I think we were probably having, yeah, the bills. The interesting thing is when he went away to college, right? Uh, my worry was never even in a million years thought that he would get SUD, right? I thought I would get a call from the college that he has overrun the plumbing or something, because he was always using the bathroom, and to the point that his hands were like, so he would keep washing his hands. He would you know keep having a bath, and then if I knocked on the door to say, hey, it's already an hour, he would say, oh, you've interrupted me while I was bathing, so now I feel very dirty, I have to have my bath all over again. So I thought that he would have so many baths that I would get a complaint from the school that he is hogging the bathroom and that he's not coming out. This is what was my biggest fear about sending him off to college.
Mm-hmm.
I never thought that it would get converted to SUD at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Any tips for eye contact OCD? Usually feel like I'm over staring, so I get anxious, have a hard time focusing on conversation. One of the things that I've done for that is to purposely have a conversation where we stare at each other the entire time that we're having the conversation. And we just get people to be so not even caring about it anymore as we just stare at each other. This is a classic ERP kind of experience, right? Where you have the person do the thing that they're afraid of, and they do it so much that they learn that they can handle it. All they've wanted to do is avoid it, and they felt like the reason everything is quote unquote okay is because they've avoided it. So let's just stare at each other, have an entire conversation. I've done this for, half an hour where we've literally been like, even when we're doing this live, like this close to each other and just staring at each other the whole time, sometimes in just silence and staring at each other. And let me tell you what happened after about a half hour of that person didn't really care if they made eye contact anymore about it, because they learned, boy, I can handle that. It's not as bad as what I thought it was going to be. That's for darn sure. Right. So
Actually, that reminds me, Patrick, if I can, with some of the therapies my son went to, he was when we first took him to the psychologist, he said he was so scared of dropping electronics. Like the washing hands was one thing, but he was very afraid that he would drop electronics. So I remember this exercise that for a week he was carrying around, a TV or something like that, like he was asked to just carry.
that's big.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so he had to carry that around just to get used to the fact that he could drop it, but that he was comfortable. And then that helped him get over that. So I still remember many of the exercises that he did. Very interesting.
Mhm.
And I think that one of the big things is learning that you can handle it. That's true of recovery from substances and from OCD. Is you can handle the discomfort, you can handle the uncertainty, you can face the next emotion without having to do a compulsion, without having to use a substance. And yes, things will go wrong, and you'll be okay.
Yeah.
Or you'll handle it if you're not,
Yeah.
right?
If you're
That
not.
is,
Yeah. And that goes with, it's okay not to be okay. When I say okay, I don't mean like everything's going to be, not reassurance. It's like, you'll be okay. Even if you're crying ugly tears,
Yeah.
you'll handle it.
Mhm. So someone even on here says, I was doing an exposure, someone triggered me, the urges came in 100 times stronger, and it felt like I was holding myself back. Since then, I refused to do the same exposure. What's your opinion on this? OCD is really strong and really convincing, is my opinion on this. But I don't care if the urge is 10,000 times what it was. It doesn't mean that something is going to happen. And if you react to it as if it is, and you do a compulsion or another safety behavior, you've let OCD win. So I'll pull up my usual now. I don't usually do this when I have guests, but I'll do it now. I have a massive urge, just so the two of you know right now, to grab a bottle of alcohol, since we're talking about substance use, stick a rag in it, light it on fire, run across the street, throw it at my neighbor's house, setting their home on fire with the Molotov cocktail. Then I will go in the middle of my street. I will poop in a brown paper bag, and then I will light it on fire, and I will put it in front of one of my other neighbors' homes. I will ring the doorbell. They will come out. They will see the flame. They will step on it, and then they will get flaming poop on their shoe. I will then laugh at them, and then I will shoot 3 geese that are flying over my home to the pond behind me, and then I will come back and join the webinar. And the urge is 8 million times more than it's ever been prior to me stating this. And guess what? I still might not do it, but I also might.
You might.
So we'll see. I've got it looks to be I've got 15 minutes left to fulfill it, and we'll see if it happens, right? But this is the thing, and I think it's important to talk about with OCD that an urge is also part of OCD. An image is also part of OCD. It's not just a thought, right? And sometimes people hear I have OCD thoughts, and then they say, well, I don't have thoughts. I have images, or I have these urges that so I must not have OCD. It's still OCD. But
yeah.
Stacey, can you talk for a moment, especially in your work in the OCD world? We talk also about urges and cravings in the substance use world. Can you kind of define what we're talking about with cravings and urges in substance use?
Well, yeah, as you said, you can have how to put this? You can have a craving, but it's how you respond to it. You can have an urge, but it's how you respond to it.
Yeah.
And so the thought, the image, or the craving for a substance is not the problem. It's the response to them.
Correct.
And even, I found myself in a situation once where, well into my recovery, I went on a cruise and had a great time, did the sail away party, crawled into bed at night, and I had the thought that, unfortunately, well, when I say unfortunately, I had a cabin with a balcony, and I had the thought that I was going to jump off in the middle of the ocean, and I literally felt like I had the urge to move.
Uh-huh.
And I was like completely caught off guard by that, because I hadn't been on a cruise ship before. I didn't know that was coming. It just, my OCD decided to have a little field day and, harass me about it. but it's the response to that. It's like, that's what I got back to after I got done being a little like, oh my God, what's going on here? And then I was like, oh, okay, I know what's going on here. We're fine. I could unwrap because I had wrapped my hands in the sheets for a second. And then I was like, no, unwrap it. You know what this is. So really it's the response to that craving, to that thought, to the feeling that I can't handle this unless I do this compulsion, unless I take this substance. So that's the response prevention part, which interestingly is not the language that we use in SUD treatment. We say, refusal skills, but it is response prevention. You can have an urge to use a substance and choose to respond differently.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You're right, actually, because if they don't use that, it's interesting because I think when my son got completely into the throes of addiction, right, then I think he was told that, okay, the highest part of his that urge to do it is in the first 20 minutes or something like that. And, if he is able to breathe through that or talk through that and let the 20 minutes go by, then that urge comes down, and it's so I think the urges will be there, right? I think it's all in how we respond to them. I think that's
I have urges all the time to do harm to Stacey whenever we see each other at conferences, and she just harms me because she doesn't. It doesn't even have to be an urge. She just hauls off and hits me every time we see each other. So it doesn't. I don't know if that's OCD or you just hate me, but
no, it's just fun.
Yeah, it's just fun. Oh, it's just fun. Okay,
It's
so
fun.
that's fine. But one of the things that I hear all the time, and we've addressed here, but it's always important, I think, to repeat something like this, is if you look at most of the questions we get week after week here, you could apply all of the answers we've already given to them. But people will always come in and say something like, yeah, but mine seems different. Mine feels, what if this is one that's different than all the other ones? What if this one just feels more than all of the other ones? What if this one is 100 times more urgy than the other ones, or any of these types of things? And I think you probably have seen now in the last 4.5 years that we give pretty much the same answers, right? That OCD will always try to trick you into believing that there is something new about this. But in the reality is the emperor has no new clothes in this situation, right? It is nothing new, right? It might be dressed up slightly differently, but in the end, it's all kind of the same. We're going to want people to learn how to handle living in the discomfort, living in the doubt, living in the guilt, living in the shame, living in the anxiety, living in the whatever unwanted, untoward type of emotional experience OCD is going to create, because OCD is going to keep trying to send a message to you that says, guess what? You can't handle this. I think of Jack Nicklaus. You can't handle the truth. Yeah, right. OCD screaming at you that you can't handle this. And unfortunately, you fall for the lie. You believe it, right? Right. Yeah. And because of that, you act as if this one is different than all of the other ones. But so far, I don't know about you, Stacey, but I have done one thing for every presentation of OCD, and that is exposure and response prevention therapy.
Yes.
I have one answer for all of the stuff. And that answer is a very helpful answer, right?
Yes.
That answer works very, very well.
And the paradoxical reality is when you allow yourself to live with uncertainty, to flip the script, to say, yeah, maybe I will lose it. Maybe I, could flip out. That's when you get what it is that you want, which is recovery. Mm-hmm. When you allow yourself to say, yeah, Maybe I did run somebody over. I'm not sure. But when you do that exposure response prevention, you get the thing that OCD has you chasing, which is relief of the anxiety.
I mean, OC Doozy says here, can you tell, OC Doozy, by the way, that's a fun name. I like that one. Can you tell me about any patient whose OCD has reinforced itself over decades before they discovered it was OCD? I'm really good at finding uncertainties. I mean, Stacey, does that sound like you?
No, not at all. No, my OCD hasn't reinforced itself or changed themes or popped back up when I didn't expect it to. No, not at all.
Never, right? No. Okay.
Never.
All right.
No.
Well, then OCD doozy. We don't know what you're talking about. Or, yeah, that's the way it works, right? That's just exactly what it does. OCD is always going to try to prove itself right. It will never accept also that it did anything wrong. Nope. I don't know one person's OCD who's gone, my bad. Sorry about that. That's my bad. I apologize.
Yeah.
Well, I really goofed that one up there. Forgive me. You know, I've never heard anyone's OCD doing that whatsoever.
No. And yeah, it does not. No. I'm trying to think of a time. I'm like, no. Mm-mm.
I think it's hard for people to, accept the maybe not, accept the doubt, accept the uncertainty.
Yeah.
But, Radhika, when you drive, do you have a guarantee that you'll get where you're going?
I think I don't know whether you did this deliberately, Patrick. Driving is my biggest fear.
Okay, there you go. Well, I didn't even know that, but look at that.
Well, I take the shortcut, which is I have my husband do the driving.
So you're using a safety behavior then, is what you're doing.
That's true, probably.
Yeah. That's your safety behavior.
Seriously, many times I'm not sure when I get into the car, that I think it's the acceptance that that's what it's going to be is fine. It's
Yeah. And people have struggled with acceptance, right?
Yeah.
Acceptance isn't that I want this to happen. Acceptance is, okay, it might. I mean, it could.
Yeah.
It is possible, right? And so the moment that you move from acceptance of doubt and uncertainty to the need for absolute 100% certainty, you're stuck.
Yeah, that is true.
You're stuck.
Yes.
Mario says, but how can I accept the uncertainty that you might become very sick? Well, Mario, every one of us on this call right here has been very sick, right? At some point. I've had bronchitis a couple of times. Stacey,
Yep.
Radhika, so, and guess what? All three of us accept. We're going to get sick again.
That is right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I guess so.
Yes.
Yeah. So here's the deal, Mario. You could refuse to accept it, but it'll probably still happen. So guess out of the four of us, then, if you were here, Mario, guess out of the four of us, which might have easier days? You doing everything not to accept something like this, or us accepting it and living our life? One of the things I love saying, and I've said this before, I'll say it again, you could spend the rest of your life sitting next to your tombstone wondering when you're going to be 6 feet under it, or you could live your life and show up on the day of your death and say, well, that was fun, right? And there's a lot of people who are sitting next to their tombstone worrying about how they're going to get there, what they could do to try to avoid getting there, and they don't actually live their life, right?
Yep.
And unfortunately, as we've talked about tonight, there's also people who arrive there not out of anything that they thought they were going to, because substances can take a role in people's lives, and they've taken your son, they've taken Riley, and they've taken other people, countless other people that are out there as well, right? And if we can help by spreading that message out and letting people know that not only are there compulsions that people do, but there are other safety behaviors that people do, like avoidance and reassurance seeking and distraction. But there's a fourth out of the five, because the fifth is compulsion. I always say when I do talks, the fourth safety behavior is substances, and we don't talk about it enough. We don't train ourselves in graduate school about it enough. And that's why Stacey and I do this and bring Radhika and other people in who are guests like this, just to make sure that everybody's aware. Please be very, very careful if you go down that route of using substances as a way to try to control the OCD. It can backfire significantly on the lives of people.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Any final thoughts from either of you before we head out tonight?
I think you summarized it really well, Patrick. Thank you for having me on this.
Of course. Thank you for joining us. Stacey, anything?
Nope, I think you ended it nicely. Again, OCD-SUD.com. If you want to look at some resources, there's stuff on there that's helpful, and even Patrick's on there.
Yeah, because he's not helpful whatsoever.
Yeah, not at all.
No. Thank you all for watching. And if you're looking for help for OCD or ERP for OCD-related conditions like body-focused repetitive behaviors or hoarding or tics, check us out at nocd.com. We also do NoCD 411 sessions. If you have a friend or family member that you've heard tonight and you're thinking, well, I'm really concerned about them and some of their behavior, we'd be happy to just chat with you for an hour about some of the concerns that you have. It's not a therapy session, but a good information session. We hope you enjoyed, and we will look forward to seeing you again on another episode of our Wednesday Night Weber.